Islamic investment platforms, we find that the vast majority of the investment are going to companies that have been established to be complicit in the genocide. I myself actually was an investor until recently, and I never knew the type of breakdown where my money was going. But when I investigated where my money is going, I found that underneath these labels is a very different reality. So if you've invested with, for instance, HSBC Islamic Index, or with Wahad, or with SPUS, or with most of these Islamic funds, you'll find that 15% of your wealth has gone into the pockets of Microsoft. You know, the staff who saw the inner workings of these companies told us that these companies, they are funding, they are militarily supporting genocide. What are these Islamic screening bodies doing? February 2025 and March 2025, they were still listing Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Meta and other companies complicit in genocide as halal, 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 halal. You know, you either pull your money out or expect to answer in the court of Allah when 17,000 children are pointing their fingers at you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Narrative House podcast. I'm your host, Omer Hussein. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Ahmed Hammuda. Ahmed Hammuda has addressed many issues related to the Gaza genocide, in particular investments by certain Islamic halal industries that have really been implicated in the genocide on Gaza. Ahmed is the grandson of a Nakba survivor, and today we'll be, inshallah, discussing a number of issues. But before we talk about the specific issues related to the investments, what I would really want to do is explore with Ahmed what the current situation in Gaza is. So, assalamu alaikum, Ahmed.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, Brother Omar. Thank you for having me.
No, it's been really a privilege to be able to interview and discuss some of the issues you've raised. Ahmed, obviously the situation in Gaza has reached unprecedented levels in terms of catastrophe, the horrific scenes that we continue seeing day on day of the starvation, the complete destruction of civilian life. I was just listening to the interview of Tony Aguilar, the American soldier contractor, who has really done a complete whistleblowing, activities really in the US since he got back in terms of the crimes being committed at these GHF sites. So really what I wanted to start off really is just understanding how can we maybe put it into metrics or paint a picture of the current catastrophe in Gaza.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. To be honest, Brother Omar, it says a lot when an American contractor, we recall Iraq and Blackwater and what the contractors did then. We never suspected that an American contractor would be surprised at the level of sheer brutality and sheer evil that an entity can exact on a civilian population. And this is exactly what we're seeing here. This is an American contractor who mentioned his services to the IDF as providing a client service. He's effectively been hired by the IDF to carry out their dirty work. We're talking about a human-made starvation campaign amidst a genocide as recognized by practically all reputable international bodies, the latest of whom was B'Tselem, an Israeli organization for peace. And within the background and context of a genocide, you have Gazans who have been told to go to specific aid points run by American contractors that are effectively kill zones. 1,000 Gazan civilians and counting have been killed trying to get aid at these supposedly humanitarian aid zones set up and run by the Americans. Now, this particular contractor mentions a story with a young child who came and approached him and thanked him for finding some remnants of aid thrown around on the ground and kissed his hand. And almost at the instance of him walking back to his family, happy that he had picked up the scraps of a bit of aid left by these contractors, the IDF opened machine gun fire at the crowd. And one of those martyred was this very child that he had interacted with. Yeah. So we're talking about a genocide amidst strangulation, a campaign of bombardment, a campaign of starvation. We're seeing the full effects of this insidious, evil ideology called Zionism exacted upon a civilian population in the most heinous way. And in many ways, that completely and utterly resemble the actions of Nazi Germany. I was recently reading about the final years of Nazi Germany when they themselves were suffering from hunger and starvation due to the besiegement of the Allied powers against them. So they implemented something called their hunger plan, whereby they would ration the available scraps of food on an ethno-supremacist basis, obviously starting with their race and finally ending up with the Jews. And still, within the details of this rationing, you find that they would still provide their captives in the pogroms, as evil as they were, with scraps of food. But in this case, it's total starvation to the point of death. And it's a level of evil, personally, I've never seen the like of, nor did I imagine that humanity can get to this level. Before we even speak about the support and the abetting of world powers of this evil entity.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing that I think a lot of people have commented on is this an aberration from what this Israeli state, this Jewish entity is from its start, or is this actually a continuation of the policy that they've always had? And one thing that people have cited is the survey that was carried out in Israel a few months ago, where 82% of Israeli Jews said that they supported the genocide. And I believe as many as 47% said that they believed every man, woman and child should be killed in Gaza. That's half the population. And just in this past week, I mean, if I just read some of the comments that have been made by some of these well-known Israeli Jews, one was Rabbi Ronin Shalov, who said to a packed hall, all of Gaza and every child in Gaza should starve to death. And Israel's Film Council chairman, Simon El-Kabetz, said on Israel's I-24 channel, just exterminate them, stating Palestinians are like lice. And Israeli Finance Minister Smotrich said that re-establishing Jewish settlements in Gaza was closer than ever, calling Gaza an inseparable part of the land of Israel. I mean, these are just some. And to be honest, these are just in the last week. If you look through the internet over the last 21 months, but even way beyond that, you will see many similar statements. So what is it about this entity that breeds such hatred?
Well, I think it's not an aberration. If you were to read the history of the Nakba and what preceded the Nakba, this type of designed evil and starvation and ethnic cleansing roots right back to the founding ideology of this entity. And we may have seen it on a smaller scale, but we probably don't really know because it wasn't reported at this extent. Maybe certain things have gotten worse, seeing that despite the reporting, this entity is flagrantly doing exactly the same and even more. But in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were kicked out of their homes. Now, we say this lightly, oh, they've been kicked out of their homes, but there was simultaneously a policy of extermination and a policy of terror that would try to ensure that these Palestinians would never return. I mean, one of two documented typhoid poisoning events happened in Palestine. This has been documented by the UN. In Akka, the paramilitary, as they are called, they're in fact terrorist organizations, poisoned the water wells to ensure that even if the Palestinians were considering returning to their homelands, they would be poisoned by the water there. So this type of insidious behavior, the actions such as burning people alive, is entrenched within the founding ideology of Zionism. I mean, they have in Ramot in Israel, occupied Palestine, they have a research facility called the Weizmann Institute, which was hit by a few rockets in the recent Iranian attacks. Those who know Weizmann would know that he's the father of the Israeli Zionist Flamethrower program. And he actually suggested that he was the first, I believe, to suggest that the flamethrower, which was the advancement of which was an innovation by the Zionist paramilitary groups, be used against people. And he also inaugurated various types of chemical and biological substances which were tested on animals and shown to blind these animals, and he later suggested they be used against people. So this type of biological dirty warfare underpinned by ideological dehumanization of the other roots right back to the founding ideology of Zionism. And it's a racist ideology, a fascist ideology that has taken inspiration from fascist Italy and Nazi Germany and allowed to be turned into a state. And now on Gaza, the only difference is we're seeing the full might of this ideology exacted upon what remains of the Palestinian people. Don't know, Brother Omer, if you saw the interview with Daniela Wise
Yes.
on Piers Morgan.
Yes.
I mean, she's a strange, weird woman. They consider her the mother of Israeli settlement.
That's right.
In the West Bank. And she's a Kahanist, means she follows the ideology of Me'er Kahan from New York, who are the most evil and extreme Jewish supremacist groups who believe in the total ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And what she said, I think, which should be taken seriously, and I personally like listening to these types of strange voices because they reveal the face, the otherwise hidden face of the entity. As you said, when the polls go out, we see a very different side to certain individuals who like to brandish a type of moderate narrative on media. But when you speak to these settler groups who are supported by the government and funded by the government, and in fact funded by charity groups based in the United States and based in the United Kingdom, like the Jewish National Fund and others, you find that these groups actually reveal what the rest of Israeli society is concealing.
Yeah.
And it's not me saying this. The strange thing I find is that mainly Jewish anti-Zionist narrators are the ones who are telling us about this reality, and we're scared to say it. The issue isn't only with Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir. The issue extends right into the founding principles of this racist ideology and into, unfortunately, the majority of what now constitutes the colonial entity and its people. So, as Yani, to answer your question, Brother Omar, the issue extends far further. Now, she said, I believe something on these lines, this to be the last chapter in the Palestinian struggle. So this is what makes Gaza different. The fact that they have applied everything that they have to try to finish the Palestinian question once and for all.
Yeah.
Which makes it the most significant chapter even in our lives. But we must understand that these types of genocidal narratives come with the intention of ending the Palestinian cause and embedding the colonial racist project within the Muslim lands forever, for eternity. And this is why we are seeing this level of brutality, this level of ethnic cleansing. And it seems to be with the agreement of world powers. These broad objectives are largely agreed upon. Palestine needs to end. The Palestinians need to end. They need to leave. And the last straw, or let's say the last thorn in the neck of Zionism, remains in Gaza. And this is why they've applied their full force there.
I think that really is an excellent summary of the current situation. And it leads me to a question related to a post that I saw in the last few days. It was of a scholar of political and social science. You may have seen it, where he talks about the fact that Israel and the West may have thought that they've destroyed Gaza and destroyed the will of the people. But actually what they've really destroyed is they've destroyed the belief in the Western system. So that belief that had existed for maybe the last 100 years in terms of this kind of post-colonial period that we've lived through, they've actually seen its hypocrisy, they've seen its double standards, they've seen its abject failure. And now we see a seismic shift where they're talking about an Islamic model. So where do you think the Ummah is now? Where is the future of this Ummah post-Gaza? Because to restrict this discussion to Gaza and Palestine, a lot of people will say it is really falling into the trap of the enemy, because what they're trying to do is isolate Palestine from its wider place in this Ummah.
Definitely. I mean, as we always say, Palestine is the center, the heartland of the Muslim struggle. Even from a let's say, linguistic perspective, it's called Bayt al-Maqdis.
Yeah.
And the borders of Bayt al-Maqdis extend into Syria and into all of the places Allah has blessed. Now, interestingly, the word Maqdis or Qudus means purity.
Yeah.
Allah is Al-Quddus, the most pure, Ruh al-Qudus. So Palestine is the epicenter of where the fight between purity and impurity or filth comes together. Now, subhanAllah, I was discussing this point with a friend in Gaza recently, and it's just a bit of a funny incident. And I was telling him, this is the meaning of Al-Qudus and purity, and alhamdulillah, you in Gaza, you are removing this filth of fascism and racism from the earth and so on. We are reflecting this type of activism. And then I heard his sister in the background. She said, astaghfirullah, I mean, obviously their situation can be understood. What kind of purity is this when the Zionists are standing outside of our door? So I said, Wallahi, yani, that's a fair challenge. What do I say now? Then I thought for a couple of minutes, and I thought, you know what? By Palestine being the land of purity, it doesn't mean that it is pure in an absolute sense. I said to him, it's like a washing machine. The impure, insidious ideologies need to be taken to Palestine to end. That's the place they required to go for their last chapter. That's why I would reverse what Daniela Weiss said onto herself. This is actually the last chapter of fascism and racism, the last chapter of ethnic displacement and colonialism in the Middle East, and inshallah in many parts of the world. And that's why these are the knock-on effects it's having on the rest of the world. People are not seeing this as a fight that is constrained to Palestine.
Yeah.
People are almost speaking about Palestine in terms of gratitude. And that's why a lot of people are coming to Islam, in my opinion, to say that thank you for fighting against racism and fascism on our behalf, because these are otherwise grievances that we in the West and in other places in the world, we suffer from. So if you're willing to take the physical fight and to be physically resolute and steadfast against such an ideology, then inshallah the positive knock-on effects are going to reverberate into the rest of the world. So the Muslims primarily need to understand this message, and the non-Muslims are also understanding this. Now, in terms of international law and the Genocide Convention and their own statutes, I no longer argue that Israel flouts international law. Exactly as you say, Omar. What I see is that there is no more international law, because the whole point of having a law is that it's enforceable. So laws and executive powers come hand in hand. The moment there is no executive authority to enforce a law, okay, it no longer becomes a law, it becomes a recommendation.
Yeah.
And so this is now the legacy of Zionism. The legacy of Zionism is that it has removed the concept of secular international law that at one point was governing this earth to more or less a good extent. The fact that we have had no significant world wars since the World War II after the codification of these laws is a positive thing. Now they have thrown the baby out with the bathwater, as they say. There's no more law. So what are we left with? Yesterday, subhanAllah, I was thinking about this. What laws in the past have governed the earth? Okay, and it's really just three laws. Either the secular laws that people have contrived, usually from the Judo-Christian history, or the law of Islam. So if I was to break it down to three, I'd say the Judaic law at one point, it had a huge influence over this earth. After that came international law. Both of them have failed miserably. Both of them have collapsed. So by necessity, what remains, and this is really a message for the Muslim, the void that currently remains cannot be filled by anything else, because there is nothing else that has shown to be viable. So it must be fulfilled by Islam, because the last time Islam, the way of justice, the way of truth, presided over the law of the earth, none of this was allowed to go or to reign without account.
I mean,
so this is what I'd say, Brother Omer, that it's by necessity. There's no choice now. People are looking to us now for answers. How ready the Ummah is in picking up these reins, I don't know. I'm not a professional in this field, but the question needs to be asked now is, are we ready to pick up the reins, because there's nobody else to do it?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that people would potentially come back on this point that you've raised is actually international law had failed people for decades. So if we look at post-World War II and the end of, say, Nazi Germany, what you had is one of the first rubber-stamped illegal occupations, which was granting a Jewish state in the land of Palestine on the graves and the homes and the lands of the Palestinian people. And then others will cite examples like Korea and Vietnam and Iraq war and Syria. So actually international law has failed many people for decades. But maybe what's different, I always say what's different about Gaza and not Palestine, and I mention Gaza specifically here, is I don't think we've ever seen a live stream genocide that has the backing of the world powers to this extent. So where there is no disagreement, this isn't where France is making a statement. They're making empty statements, but they're still sending weapons and they're sending funds and they're giving political cover. So I don't think we've ever seen that situation. And I think that's been almost a death blow of the international law or the world order as we know it today.
Indeed. And in the end, you have the international law, and then each entity underneath the international law will apply it in the ways that suit their people. But because the powers that be, the powers that were victorious in the Second World War, are the ones who contrived these laws, it meant that they can apply it in the way that they wish. And obviously they gave themselves advantages that they never gave others. Now, what's interesting is none of the laws, even within the Geneva Convention, speak about the prohibition of carpet bombing. Okay, because the Allies carpet bombed Dresden, and obviously they're not going to codify a law that's going to go against how they won the war, or as they deem themselves as having won the war. So obviously, but Omar, I agree with you that laws contrived by human beings are always with significant deficiencies, and we can say only by way of relativity that these laws to some degree were successful, but obviously disenfranchised and disadvantaged those who either had nothing to do with the Second World War or the weaker nations. And that's why after World War II you had colonial powers that remained within the Muslim lands for decades, and ultimately Israel was created in 1948, almost immediately after the end of the Second World War. And many of the laws that were brought in to fight against the injustices of the Second World War almost seem to exempt Israel from that. This is the project by which we exempt Israel, and he can do anything that he wants. So subhanAllah, we're now in a situation where there is no more international law. The Genocide Convention compels nations to intervene when there's a genocide. Nobody has intervened. But on top of that, who expected the nations of the world to actually abet the genocide? And this, I think, was the death knell for international law. If it ever existed, now there's nothing of it remaining.
And moving on to those who are complicit in this genocide, we saw a recent political stunt or activity that was very effective. A young Egyptian by the name of Anas Habib locked the gates of the Egyptian embassy in the Netherlands. And that went viral really across social media. And then there was many other copycat type activities that occurred. And what that did actually is it shifted the discussion from talking about those perpetrating the genocide and those directly abetting it, as you mentioned, to those who are also complicit in the genocide in other ways. So we have a situation like Egypt and Jordan, who border this occupation and who have not done anything substantial to prevent this genocide. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that they've been arresting their own people, preventing people speaking out. And we know people were making huge amounts of money, for example, trying to leave Gaza from the Egyptian side under the authority and under the say-so of Sisi and his regime. We also saw an Israeli warship going through the Suez Canal in November last year. We saw an Israeli shipment of weapons that went from Alexandria to Haifa. So really atrocious actions. But that really shifted this question of responsibility away from just the perpetrators, but to those who are also complicit. And this, I want to really use this as an opportunity to look at what you have been discussing recently about how Muslim, Islamic type, Sharia compliant type companies are actually supporting this genocide or are implicated in this genocide by investing in firms that are definitely, funding or supporting this genocide in many ways, technology firms and other firms. Could you just give us a bit more of an understanding of how these companies have done so?
Definitely, Brother Amr, Jazakallah khair. So I think in terms of people now turning their attention to the abettors of genocide, or the tacit supporters of genocide, such as the bordering nations, or indeed some of us, in ways that maybe we weren't aware of, or we didn't do so by intention, that's because we've largely given up in seeing the world powers change Israel. We've resigned to the fact that this is an entity that cannot be changed. It's an entity that needs to be dismantled and removed. So now the question is, how can we undermine this entity economically, politically, through the media, through dissemination, through other avenues? And subhanAllah, I happened to stumble upon the issue of financing and investments. I'd say quite incidentally. I myself actually was an investor until recently in an Islamic platform. And I never knew the type of breakdown where my money was going. And at the same time, we never really understood the complicity of certain, let's say, civilian, in inverted commas, corporations in abetting the genocide until quite recently. When I investigated, and I'm not an economic expert, but when I investigated where my money is going, as is the obligation of anybody seeking to invest, besides the, let's say, the labels of halal, sharia compliant, ethical, so on and so forth, I found that underneath these labels is a very different reality.
Yeah.
I found that in the majority of cases, specifically with Western-based Islamic investment platforms, I say the word Islamic lightly, but let's say this so people know what we're speaking about.
Yeah.
Islamic investment platforms, we find that the vast majority of the investment are going to companies that have been established to be complicit in the genocide. Companies such as Microsoft. So in most Islamic funds, they have Microsoft either at the top or number 2. So if you've invested with, for instance, HSBC Islamic Index, or with Wahad, or with SPUS, or with most of these Islamic funds, you'll find that 15% of your wealth, say if you've invested £50,000, around £8,000 of your money has gone into the pockets of Microsoft. Microsoft is a company that provided Israel, the IDF, with a fully fledged cloud service called Azure, and after October the 7th, multiplied its service provision to Israel by 64 times. And it gave it, in the span of just 6 months, 19,000 hours of technical support directly to the IDF. I mean, one of the contentions we got in response to our exposition was that, oh, just because Israel are using a Microsoft machine like you, oh author, does that mean that we boycott them or we divest from them? Well, this is an intentional contribution to genocide. Microsoft have actively provided their cloud services to the Israeli military specifically at that time, after October the 7th, specifically in response to the increased processing power that the IDF demanded to bomb and destroy Gaza. Then we go down the list and we find other companies like Amazon and Google, Alphabet. Amazon and Google, prior to this war, had invested $1.2 billion in a project called Nimbus that, like Microsoft, provided cloud services, AI technology, and all sorts of other surveillance type technology that Israel would use in its military arm, in its internal intelligence arm, the Shin Bet, in its external intelligence arm, the Mossad, and almost every other agency, in order to forward what it was doing in Gaza and across the world. Google and Amazon were primary abettors to this, and they provided most of the services that it required to carry out the genocide in Gaza, including very sophisticated AI services like Gemini and other platforms. And in fact, Google, in February of this year, February 2025, it removed the prohibition that it had in place against using its AI services for military purposes, specifically for the eyes of the IDF. And what does this mean for those listening to us, AI services? back in the day, you know, when things weren't quite as difficult as they are now, the Israeli army had to try to derive its targets manually. And obviously, they weren't exactly discriminatory at the time, but it was a lot more difficult for them to identify military targets from civilian targets, from hospitals, from schools, from other facilities. Now, all they need to do is to run these inputs into a machine, and that machine, provided by Google and Amazon and Microsoft, automatically exports thousands and thousands of targets. Now, obviously, those who know about computing and AI and programming would know that these inputs are set by human beings, and they carry enormous errors. But as soon as you take these inputs and you program them into a drone, into an F-35, you can attack a target, and you can say that we've run the inputs through, let's say, a legal process, as we hear a lot on mainstream media. And then it doesn't matter who's killed in terms of civilians, who's killed in terms of fighters and combatants. Now, why? Because some say that the IDF allowed up to a 100 civilian to combatant ratio directly and purposely and intently into these AI models. So they would tell the AI, give me 1,000 targets whereby I would kill 100 women and children if I can target one high-profile fighter in the resistance. And then they would proceed and bomb that target. So when they speak about ratios and 5-to-1 and 10-to-1, all of this business in a type of regrettable term, these are very intentional statistics and figures pre-programmed into the services provided by these companies that unfortunately we find Islamic investment platforms heavily funded in.
I mean,
besides the two, Brother Omer, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there was the example when they claimed, the IDF claimed that they targeted a senior fighter in a Jabalia refugee camp, if you recall, and it created a huge crater, and they killed several hundred people in that one strike, and they justified it without any concern whatsoever. Yeah, we were targeting one fighter or two fighters, and the target was apparent or was there according to our intelligence, and therefore we took out that whole refugee camp, and they killed hundreds of people, and they completely leveled many residential buildings. But I mean, I think that there's sufficient evidence to show that they have completely no concern whatsoever for the total destruction of civilian life in Gaza and its population in any case.
And as soon as this contention was raised by the staff, by Amazon and Microsoft staff, they were just fired.
Yeah,
you know, the staff who saw the inner workings of these companies told us that these companies aren't just abetting, aren't just passive observers in genocide. They are funding, they are militarily supporting genocide. They were just fired.
Yeah.
And the question that arises is, what are these Islamic screening bodies doing if in this circumstance they are still rubber stamping these companies as Sharia compliant? What an exploitation of this term.
Yeah.
What an abuse of the pure Sharia to still label these companies in 2025 lists, my brother Omer. Wallahi, look, I thought I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I said, before we do this exposition, it's going to cause a lot of excitement.
Yeah.
Let's look at the latest lists from reputable Islamic screening websites. February 2025 and March 2025, they were still listing Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Meta and other companies complicit in genocide as halal, 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 halal. You know, it's almost like they put this criteria in a type of black box computer algorithm provided by a specific individual with a Sharia degree, and it just spits out halal or haram, and anybody can apply this type of criteria. Now we also find other companies like Meta. Meta appears on the halal list. I mean, Meta from day one, it was manufacturing consent for genocide. It was suppressing Palestinian and pro-Palestinian voices, according to Human Rights Watch, on a systematic scale. Blacklisting people. I myself, I have 2 strikes on my YouTube account for saying nothing. SubhanAllah. And most of the content I produce, wallahi now I've given up, gets maximum 10 views, sometimes up to 50 views. I say, wallah, alhamdulillah, 50. Maybe 10 of them are sort of my family and friends. And the 40 by mistake, they accidentally happen to trip up on my profile. everything we do that says the word Palestine, that says the word genocide, that says the word Zionism, that says the word ethnic cleansing, automatically barred. Are these not facts? Are these not
No, they're
realities
clear facts. I mean, I think,
confirmed by international bodies?
yeah,
And we find investments in Islamic screened platforms saying that Meta in black and white is halal. How on what basis are we saying? Now, I only covered, Brother Omar, I only covered 5 companies. Wallahi, because I wanted to, and I only covered investments. I never spoke about boycotts. You've got boycotts, investments, and sanctions. We said, okay, forget boycotts, because then the issue of darura, necessity, and I need this and I need that, it's going to come into it, and it's a hairy topic. Let's talk about investments, which is usually done out of the surplus income of most people, not even surplus, supra surplus income of most people. 5 companies, $2 billion from Islamic screen funds. Now, subhanAllah, the interesting thing is that after we published these findings, obviously it caused a lot of excitement, a lot of uproar. My phone was going off all day. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of these providers, some very positive, some not so positive, let's say. And we published further 2 articles to double down on the issue. And subhanAllah, what we found is that nobody challenged us on technical grounds. Most people, when they challenged us on personal grounds. They said, for instance, one person spotted yesterday that I have my book on Amazon. Okay. And I said, Wallahi, making 7p per book seems to be the greatest financial hypocrisy of our time. But to be honest, I was speaking about investments. I'm speaking about an issue that you can very easily come out from. And they said, what's the alternative? I said, well, to be honest, I'm not a financial advisor to need to give you alternatives. But there are many alternatives. You have houses, properties, you have gold. You can just keep it in your pocket and wait until things pan out. You've got thousands of Islamic funds that are entirely, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, divested from these types of companies, and you found nothing else to invest in but Microsoft and Google and Amazon, and you are labeling this as some sort of darura. And then subhanAllah, subsequently, a report came out by the UN Special Rapporteur just the other day. SubhanAllah, and this was actually a couple of weeks after the last article we published. I said, Alhamdulillah. She listed 50 companies that are complicit in genocide. All of the companies practically that we listed multiplied by 10.
Yeah.
So we were very, let's say, gentle in speaking about this issue, in revealing or exposing this issue. But maybe what ruffled the feathers is the fact that we challenged the Sharia boards that maybe we can speak about. Brother Omar, I'm happy, wallahi, to speak about. We're not here to make friends.
Yeah, no.
The fact that we challenged the screening criteria, the fact that we challenged some of their assumptions, we challenged where their hearts were. Well, one thing that crossed my mind the other day is when you've invested in Microsoft, and Microsoft have a huge stake in the genocide, if you were to hear that due to some type of fallout between Microsoft and the IDF pulled out, and that's going to cause a crash in the Microsoft share of 20%, tell me, is that going to make you happy or is it going to make you upset? Now, if you say that if Microsoft share drops by 20% because the IDF happens to pull out, it upsets me, then wallahi, my retort to that would be, brother, check your Iman.
Yeah.
If you're upset at the fact that your fund is not doing well because the IDF happened to divest for some reason or another, then this is the really dangerous place for your heart to be in.
Yeah, no, I think that's really. Yeah, I went through your articles, and one of the things that you mentioned, and I think it's a really important point, which a lot of people belittle actions, and that doesn't only relate to this discussion about investments, but I feel it's actually much more common in the way people discuss any pro-Palestinian advocacy or activity. They tend to belittle the level of impact that they can have. So, for example, they say, oh, I'm just one person. What can I do? If I was to pull my investment, or if I was to boycott this company, or if I was to go and, join this protest, or I was going to give this talk or do this social media post, you can belittle almost anything and say, well, it's not going to have an impact. And I think you addressed this and you said, even though it's a very, very small portion of that total investment that these companies receive, there is a question about our own accountability and our own, I think, standing for justice. Maybe you can just elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, Umar, barakallah fiqh. This isn't actually a secondary issue. You see, a lot of the retort to the article was premised on the fact that action is only effective if it's done by the collective. Okay, but in reality, where does it say that? In our paradigm as Muslims, we as individuals need to take a stand for justice. And in most cases, not in many cases, in most cases, those who take a stand for justice are the minority. Look at Gaza. It's a minority of people taking a physical stand for justice.
Yeah.
It's a minority of people supporting the Gazans. It's a minority of people willing to suffer in terms of their personal circumstances and livelihoods for the sake of truth and justice. So when has the minority or being part of a minority been a reason for you not to be part of a specific action? Actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about those who attain the highest levels in Jannah, of paradise in the Akhirah, He speaks about them in terms of them being a minority. And in fact, subhanAllah, there's another interesting reflection in the Quran here. Whenever a minority is mentioned in the Quran with regards to the believers, it's mentioned positively. And in most cases, Allah speaks about a majority, He speaks about it in negative or reprehensible terms. Like وَمَا أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ وَلَوْ حَرَصْتَ بِمُؤْمِنِينَ. Most people will not be believers. Most people will not follow your way. وَمَا آمَنَ مَعَهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. Nobody believed in Nuh except the minority. So in fact, you should take it as an opportunity. It's a very easy one, okay, to be part of that minority. Not to say, because our actions have no effect, it means we shouldn't do those actions. And to be honest, this doesn't just undermine the whole concept of boycotts. It undermines the whole concept of being a Muslim. So if nobody prayed, you don't pray? If you know what, I don't want to pick up litter off the streets because me picking up litter isn't going to solve the world's problem of pollution.
Yeah.
This type of mindset, it's disastrous, Brother Omer. And subhanAllah, prior to this article, everybody was talking about boycotting Starbucks. A cup of coffee for £2.50. Or boycotting Happy Meals. And we were all on board. Like, I need to boycott Happy Meals. This is a much easier outcome. Somebody rang me, one brother rang me after the first article. And he said, Ahmed, you know what? I was considering investing. He's a wealthy brother. We're talking about 40 or 50,000 pounds. And after reading your article, I did not invest. I thought, subhanAllah, 50,000 pounds is 25,000 cups of Starbucks coffee. That's one brother. So surely this is a low-hanging fruit. And we're also addressing an economic elite that can very easily withdraw their funds with no impact whatsoever on their livelihoods. And still we're getting a pushback. Subhanallah. So the question is, my brother, is how serious are we about Gaza? How serious are we about wanting to stop this starvation and this genocide? This question really needs to be a lot of retrospection.
But honestly, I think at this point, a lot of Muslims are unsure about how to move forward. I think it really does need a discussion about what is our activism, what should our activism look like? Because too many people, I think, have settled to whatever feels comfortable and they've continued to do that. But actually, they're not really understanding the scale and the need of the time. But inshallah, I'll move on to a question.
For the purposes of this podcast, Brother Omer, anybody who has invested, check out where your investments are going. And if it's going to a company that's abetting the genocide, withdraw your funds because now you know. And actually, I'm sorry that you know. I'm sorry that you've ended up watching this podcast because now you are accountable. You either pull your money out or expect to answer in the court of Allah when 17,000 children are pointing their fingers at you. So khalas, as an action point of this podcast, this is what we want to achieve. In terms of activism, in terms of general activism, don't ask the problem as to what is the solution. We are asking you. We want you to employ your creativity as to what needs to be done. Just, subhanAllah, at the beginning of this, Brother Omer, genocide, we had calls with, especially ISOCs, Brother Ahmed, what are we supposed to do? Can you sort of give us a shopping list of all of the let's say, steps of activism that we can stop this genocide. And subhanAllah, at the time, maybe we were very naive. We still are to a large extent, thinking that we can give a shopping list and this thing's going to stop. Now, anybody who asks me this question, I say to them, Wallahi, I don't know. What should we do? This brother, he locked the gate of the Safara. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, he made impact and nobody suspected. That's quite creative thinking.
Yes.
What can we do? You're different to me. Don't ask the web of inaction and uncreativity as to what needs to be done. Ask yourselves. I'm asking you, what shall we do, my brother? Think creatively. What can be done? We need your mind. We need the minds to sit together and to think outside of the box. How can we stop this?
Yeah.
Okay, don't just tell me signing petitions and going to protests. It's all great. But think we need more creative ideas.
Yeah.
So the question is back to you. What shall we do?
Yeah. No, that's an important point. Brother, I want to ask you about this whole Islamic finance industry where they just put in a label of halal and Sharia compliant, halal, Sharia certified, etc. But it can be very misleading, this branding. How are these companies using such branding in such terms, to obviously raise finances and give confidence to Muslims to invest?
Okay. Firstly, just a general spiritual point here. If something is called halal, it does not absolve you from a Sharia legalistic perspective from checking whether it's actually halal. Okay, a lot of brothers, sisters will take the label and somebody influential said it and they will assume it's halal. Anything that you delve in puts upon you the obligation to investigate it.
Yeah.
Anything that you delve in, you need to be a faqih, a jurist in the actions that you're delving in. That's the first point. So by saying they said it's halal, that's not an excuse, I'm afraid, even if they are the biggest mashayikh on earth. To answer your question, Brother Omar, what's happened is you have certain Sharia committees and bodies that at some point in the past decided that in order to open the market, to democratize the process, as is the word they keep using against us, we need to create a criteria that's easy to investigate simply by looking at the balance sheet of a company to determine if it's halal or haram.
Okay.
طيب. So they came up with a number of criteria. One is to do with usury, a specific percentage of usury, like 5%, let's say. Any company that has 5.1% is haram. Any company that has 4.9% in its balance sheet is halal. طيب. We won't get to that, okay? But these are problematic in and of themselves.
Yeah.
The other one is interest-bearing debt against normal debts and against company value. And they came up with a figure, I think, of 33% or something arbitrary like that. And they based it on specific ahadith and ayat, which don't seem, to me at least, to have any relation with the question at hand.
Okay.
3 and 4, any company that invests in haram products and companies that are in and of themselves weapons or military companies. Haram products means pork, gambling, tobacco, and the list goes on. And military companies that are primarily there to serve military purposes, like Lockheed Martin, like Palantir, some of these large military companies. So this type of criteria was set, then everybody went away with this criteria, and your regular Tom, Dick and Harry Muslim brothers started to apply them and to create their own portfolios based on that criteria.
Yeah.
Most portfolios track pre-existing portfolios minus the haram investments as determined by this criteria. So for instance, HSBC Islamic fund would set a benchmark for many other funds to follow. And they would follow the same percentage allocations because it has a history of a specific projection. But they would remove from them the companies that they deem haram. When you come to investigate these lists, you find very strange findings. For instance, you'll find Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola. You find Johnson & Johnson's, a long-time supporter of the IDF. Microsoft, Google, Amazon. But you also find News Corp, Rupert Murdoch's News Corp. You find very strange investments. So the question is, why are these there? Because they don't fit that rigid criteria set by these bodies. طيب, why don't they keep changing this criteria? Functionally, it's not possible. It's too difficult. That means that every year, not even every year, every week, there needs to be a re-revision, as should be the case, by the way, because that's the whole meaning of ijtihad, knowing the changing circumstances of the time, of the instant, and making a fatwa that corresponds. But no, to make it functional, they did it at one point, and everybody went away and took away these criteria and applied them to all of the companies under the sun. And that's how these halal portfolios were made. And that's why until today, Feb 2025, the funds are still producing lists that show the same company as being halal, because the initial criteria was never changed, was never revised. Now, some, very quickly, Brother Omar, some, and I think this is a bit of a cop-out, but maybe it's going to provide an alternative. Some funds have surrendered to the fact that this criteria cannot be changed, because these boards are very powerful and they're backed up by large banks and institutions. So they've come up with an ethical fund that can potentially incorporate BDS elements, an ethical fund. But what then you have is a fund which is ethical but not halal, and a fund which is halal but is not ethical. So you create more confusion into the situation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا أُحِلَّ لَهُمْ قُلْ أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. They ask you what has been made permissible for them. Allah has made for you permissible the good things, the ethical things, the tayyibat. So the two come hand in hand. By you introducing an ethical fund, it may partially resolve the problem, but it's not going to fix the issue of people appropriating the name of halal and sharia compliance for old, outdated criteria that are probably wrong to begin with.
Yeah.
So this is the type of development happening in the world now, Brother Omar. And there are some funds that are genuinely trying to apply the BDS criteria, albeit they are more risky than the conventional ones, because they try to target startups and companies that don't have much history and so on and so forth. But I'm not in a position to advise on this. Okay, all I can say is the lack of alternatives that we can see does not give you the excuse to continue delving into the haram. Categorically, this is haram. Everything that's going on here.
I mean, what's interesting there is that you've obviously discussed their methodology to rubber stamp these things as Sharia compliant. I mean, a crazy thought was coming to my mind. It's almost like someone saying, this only has 5% pig blood in it. Will satisfy this halal.
Not 4.9%.
Yeah, not 4.9%. As I mean, subhanAllah, the whole concept seems very against the principles of Islamic finance. It's almost like Islamic finance has been relegated to a few simple points like riba and certain things that you can't sell like alcohol, etc., and not actually that it has its own system and a methodology of how companies should be formed and how investments should be paid and losses should be attributed. All this, Islam has a whole rich history of Islamic economy. It seems like that's gone out of the window and we've just adopted the capitalist model and they said, oh, here you go, rubber stamp, it's Sharia compliant.
Yeah, not even the board rubber stamping it. It's the criteria rubber stamping it.
Yeah.
Because what we're seeing now is this criteria. I reckon the guy who came up with the criteria must have been a computer scientist, because he thought ahead. He thought, how am I going to allow something to be systemized, programmed? It has to be 5%, because if it's 4.9%, the algorithm is going to say haram. If it's 5%, that's when it's going to give it a tick. So I think it's to facilitate the process and to allow Muslims to access these markets. We're talking about a market worth $7 trillion. This is the Islamic funding. The Islamic finance market is worth $7 trillion. So can you imagine if they remove giants like Microsoft and Google? Immediately it's going to restrict access to this type of market. But the answer to this is, so be it. Who cares after Gaza? What type of access is restricted? Actually, Gaza has exposed the fact that we need to think of alternatives, not just financial alternatives, but in everything. We need media alternatives. Even this podcast, I imagine it's going to be blacklisted on Facebook if it goes up. We need serious alternatives to media. We need serious alternatives to politics. We can't be part of pre-existing systems. All of these systems have failed us. We need alternative economic models that not just fund our industries as Muslims, the just, the true, the good, clean industries, but also give a share, a portion to our suffering brothers and sisters as business as usual, just as they assign a portion of their profit sheet every single year to the IDF. A portion of our profit sheets needs to be continuously assigned to the causes of justice, specifically Palestine, specifically Bayt al-Maqdis. These are our models. We need to think creatively. Stop telling me these brothers, yani Allah yahdihum, yani they keep saying you're asking us to change from without, not from within. Allah, you know, akhi, sometimes you need to leave. Sometimes the situation dictates upon you to withdraw.
Yeah,
but not to be part of a system that is inherently corrupt.
Yeah, but this discussion again, it can broaden out to so many more topics, because what you've said there isn't just about finance; it's about media, politics, etc. I heard a very good podcast a couple of weeks ago that people were talking about this new party, and one thing that the brother mentioned, it was a very powerful point. He said that one of those MPs, and I don't want to name names because I don't want to make that the point, but her position on this was that obviously she had to move away from the Labour Party and she was an independent candidate because of the fact that they were supporting genocide in Gaza. But then he mentioned the point that she supported the position of abortions till, I think, the very end of a pregnancy term, which is obviously something not accepted in Islam in any of the schools of thought. So it was just showing that we can sometimes become open to discussions about, you know, let's say issue-based discussions, as opposed to looking at things more holistically, where economy, politics, ethics, all of these things has a clear Islamic viewpoint that if actually you looked at it, it would provide solutions. But we're trying to, a lot of the time, make it fit into a current system that is diametrically opposed to how we view things.
Yeah, exactly. Let's first agree on the broad lines. Islam's a socialist system or a communist system or a capitalist system, or we always want to relegate and constrain and retrofit Islam into the prevailing narratives and systems of the world. No, Islam is above all of these things. Islam is the way of the creator of the heavens and the earth.
I mean, you said it was one of the
forefront of designing these programs.
Yeah, and you mentioned it was it had its own complete political, legal system.
Look, Brother Omer, subhanAllah, in the end, Gaza has shown us and proved to us. We didn't need to see, alhamdulillah. We knew this. We knew this in an abstract way and by reading history. But Gaza has shown us that the only system on earth that will afford justice to everybody is the system of Islam.
Yeah.
The only, I'll tell you it now, and maybe this is for the record. When Zionism comes to an end, comes to a crashing end, inshallah, soon, the Jewish people in Palestine will find refuge nowhere on earth except in the Muslim heartlands. And subhanAllah, what's ironic about this is that the very father of Netanyahu, who was a revisionist Zionist, who believed in the dehumanization and the subordination of the Arabs, he was actually an expert on the Jewish history of Spain. Benzian Netanyahu. He was an expert on the Jews in Spain under the Umayyad Khilafah, where they had their Jewish golden age and era. They will realize that when the West realizes that this entity will come to a crushing halt with all of what it's done, nobody will want to accommodate such ideas and behaviors.
Yeah.
So you will find that the only place willing to accommodate justice are the heartlands of the Muslims. So the world has shown, and it's proven, and Gaza has shown and proven, you know, the Gazans who were the most demeaned, the most dehumanized, the most, in terms of those considered as monsters and savages, they've shown us to be the most gentle, the most compassionate, the most persevering, the most resilient, the most resistant, the bravest people on earth. How then with the rest of the ummah? So alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, our ummah has proven through the example of Gaza that there is nobody but the Muslim ummah ready to take up the reins in every field, economically, politically, on the media front, in every avenue in which its primary focus will be justice for all, not just justice for the Muslims.
And as you say, the blueprint of Palestine, 1400 years from the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu through this time only had these two periods of Judeo-Christian rule. You could say the Crusades, and now this Jewish entity under this kind of concept of Jewish supremacist Zionism has seen bloodshed and destruction, and land stolen and people displaced and killed. But actually, Islamic history brought peace to that region. And it's interesting, or the problem really is how media and the current world order has been able to present a different narrative. But as you say, that has been undone to a large extent over the last almost 2 years. And I think that's probably been the biggest shift, what we've seen in the last 2 years, of people really understanding the history of Palestine, and that it didn't start on the 7th of October. And, you know, looking back even further in terms of what Islam brought to this region in the past as well.
Yeah, but because it only takes for you to remove this active and continuous demonization for people to see the beauty of Islam. You know, people don't need to give da'wah. And this is also what Gaza has really demonstrated between, I believe, October and December of 2023. They say across the UK and France, 40,000 people became Muslim. And we were hearing from imams that 7 out of 10 of those who embraced Islam were attributing that to Gaza and Palestine. And not a single da'iyah has come out of Palestine and addressed the Western audience. But simply through momentary removal of the dehumanization and the demonization of the Muslim, suddenly the purity and the beauty of Islam emerged for everybody to see. So yani, this is very intentional that we are being dehumanized and demonized continuously for the powers that be that don't want the world to come to Islam.
Of course.
Because it only needs for them to remove it momentarily, to stop funding those media organizations momentarily, to stop funding those killing us and bombing us momentarily, for people to see the beauty of Islam unfold independently. It doesn't rely on us. Allah's nur doesn't rely on us. It's in and of itself, it's radiant. In and of itself, it's evident. You know, and subhanAllah, within our framework and within our way of life, we're required to give a good example to all, because we are a proselytizing faith. We're not an ethno-supremacist faith belonging to the Eastern traditions. We would love for people to become Muslim. And the primary way for people to become Muslim is to see good example in us. So these are genuine behaviors. And yes, genuinely, we want you to become like us, because ultimately we want to save you from the fire. And we're not here to make you comfortable. We're here to warn you that this world has been, that Allah has created us, God has put us on this earth to test us. And we want you, our fellow brothers and sisters in humanity, to succeed in the test for which the Creator who created you and me put you on this earth for. So ultimately, we're not looking for domination. We're not looking to overpower anybody. We're looking for one thing, and that is to save people from God's wrath and the hellfire, and to take them to his eternal abode and paradise. That's the charter of the Muslim. That's the charter of the Muslim. We have no existential crisis with anybody. Alhamdulillah, the Jews have lived within Muslim lands with no issue and with no bloodshed, as have done the Christians. We don't see your strength, the strength of the Christians or the Jews or the strength of the atheists, or as some type of existential threat to our way of life, because we are connected to the Creator. The only reason we may combat these ideologies is simply for you. But if you insist on them, it's up to you what you choose to do. So this is our way, Brother Omar. I think we need to emphasize this, because Gaza has, alhamdulillah, has done everything for us. But at the same time, sometimes we need to push people over the line. Some people are very close, and some people are extremely psychologically troubled by what's happening in Gaza. You just need to push them over the line and say, Tayyib, you've now seen the collapse of the idol of Western humanism and modernity. Come to the way of Allah. It's as simple as that.
No, Jazakallah khair
May
for
Allah
those,
guide people to the way of Islam, Ya Rab.
Jazakallah khair for those inspirational words, Ahmed. I know our topic has, our podcast has gone into different realms and different points, and I think that's really important, because we're here to understand how this all fits into Gaza and the wider world. This isn't about a single issue of investments and a single issue of boycotting or activism. It's about actually a much wider discussion that the Ummah and humanity really needs to be having. And, one thing I would mention is that even many scholars point out, for example, that the whole idea of investments in stock markets is questionable, and some talk about it not being from the Islamic economic system. And maybe that's something we can explore in the future. But I think there was a lot of other points that really need to be explored, especially about how does our activism fit into what is going on in Gaza? Because, a lot of people view it as almost as spectators. And I'd really like, inshallah, maybe to have that discussion in a future podcast. Really, what can we as Muslims throughout the world do to be involved in this solution for Gaza and see maybe even beyond it and how it interconnects with the other struggles within this ummah?
Indeed, Brother Omar, and I really appreciate you for having me and for the time you've given me and the opportunity. People can visit the coverage on our blog, sarim.blog, and read the article for themselves.
Yeah.
There are 3 articles concerning this topic. Alhamdulillah, we now have this podcast to explain to you the situation. The final message is, as well as doing what you can, never lose hope. This dark cloud will, insha'Allah, move away, and one day, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, all of the khair and all of the blessings will return to our ummah. This is a very dark spot in the history of our people, and we are suffering to great extents. But we must never lose hope. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us through Gaza His might and ability, that He has removed from them all material means for victory and for overcoming their genocide. And insha'Allah, what we will see in the future is that they will overcome it, and nobody will be able to say that it was because of me. So insha'Allah, it will entirely restore our dependence on the Creator of the heavens and the earth. So never lose hope in this, brothers and sisters. And ultimately, when we lose hope and we despair, we become inactive and unproductive. So know that Allah's Nasr is coming. This is the most significant chapter in your lives, most likely. So aim to put your name there somewhere, even if it costs you on a personal level. Aim and strive not to be a footnote in this immaculate story of Gaza.
Jazakallah khair, Ahmed. It was a real pleasure to have this discussion with you, and inshallah, hopefully our viewers will benefit from the points that you've raised. Just to mention, we will be putting the links to your posts within the description of the video.